This video is the first video describing the structural adjustment rules. And you may remember in a previous video that I mentioned the transfer grammar is responsible for taking our semantic representations, which are heavily influenced by English, and then reworking them in any way necessary to create a new underlying deep structure representation that's appropriate for your target language. So, by the time these rules have all been executed, you need to have the proper structures in place, the proper target language words in place, and the proper features in place. And then, the synthesizing grammar will synthesize the final surface forms. So, the structural adjustment rules are the last type of rule in the transfer grammar. So whatever work hasn't been done by these rules, you will need to do down here. These rules, they're the most powerful rules in the system. They're also the most difficult to use, most challenging to use. For example, if you're working in a clause chaining language, you'll need to write a rule that will build the clause chains. So these rules need to do whatever is left after all these other rules have been executed. Whatever is left needs to be done by the structural adjustment rules. And in the structural adjustment rules, you can have up to 99 groups. We provide one group, initialize all contextual features. That's for initializing features. For example, in every language we've worked in, it's been very helpful to have a noun phrase feature that indicates whether the noun phrase is heavy or light. Heavy noun phrases contain a relative clause, nouns don't. So then the phrase structure rules can position heavy noun phrases at a different place than the light noun phrases. So you would write a rule and put it in this group that does that sort of thing. Here, in all of these other rules, we've provided the groups and the input structures and things like that for you. Here, for the structural adjustment rules, you need to provide that. So, to add a new group, you can double-click here, and then you enter the group name. Before we do this, I want to look at another language. We can look at the Tagalog grammar. If we look at their structural adjustment rules, there's that initial group that I just mentioned, initialize all contextual features. And what we found best is to make groups that deal with issues related to each syntactic category. So we have one group called nominal issues, and there are rules in there that relate to issues that are based on nouns. Then we have a group for verbal issues, for adjectival issues. Whenever you have a comparative construction, you'll probably need a structural adjustment rule that does something, provides the marker of comparison or something. So what we found is we have groups based on the syntactic categories. And then we have other groups. Here in the Philippines, the languages have a focal system and they use case markers. So there's one rule to set each clause's focus. And then we select the case markers appropriately. Then there are rules for subordinate clauses, adverbial clauses, and relative clauses, and object complement clauses, etc. We almost always write rules that combine two short, simple sentences into one longer sentence. So here's one of those rules. This one has 17 structures. And some of these are a challenge to write. But these all belong in the structural adjustment rules. Okay? So let's go ahead and add a new group. I'll double-click here, and we'll enter a group called nominal issues. Let's just add another one while we're here. We'll call it verbal issues. Now let's write a rule. Here we are at Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, the phrase "in the beginning," that's an oblique. Normally it doesn't go at the beginning of a sentence, but we've marked this. If you look at that participant status, the value is significant time, meaning we really want to give prominence to this word beginning. However your language does that, you need to write a rule that will accomplish that. Quite often, we write a rule that will put this noun phrase at the beginning of the sentence. That's how we indicated that it's prominent. So, we can write a structural adjustment rule that will look for nouns that have our participant status value of significant time, and then that rule will adjust that noun phrase's grammatical relation from an oblique to a fronted oblique. Okay, so let's double click on this group name. Now here we need to select a syntactic category, and we should select the syntactic category that's most related to what this rule is going to do. So this particular rule is related to nouns. So we have to choose one of these. We can't enter a user-defined category or anything like that here. So we're going to choose nouns. And we can always change that later if we want. So here's an empty structural adjustment rule. We specified noun, but we can always change that to an add position or anything. But we want this to be a noun, and I'll mention why later. Let's give this rule a name. Set all NPs with a significant time nominal to fronted oblique. And now we need to build the input structure. These rules have up to 99 structures, and as I mentioned with the theta grid adjustment rules, when it's time to execute this rule, TBTA will start with the last structure. If you define 10 structures, it will start with that 10th one and then work its way forward. Okay, we just want to put a noun phrase into the input structure, so we'll click here, insert the opening boundary, click there, insert the closing boundary. Now let's insert a noun into it. Click anywhere inside that noun phrase. We can insert a source concept, a target word, or a target word in a user-defined category. We just want to insert a noun. So let's say noun. If we wanted a particular noun, then we could choose one. But we don't. We want this rule to apply to any noun, so we're going to leave that blank. And we'll set the feature to significant time, and we'll set the grammatical relation to oblique. And that's all we need for this input structure. Now let's go to the output structure, and we want to set the noun phrase's grammatical relation to fronted oblique. But we see that that isn't an option. So we click on Feature Set, we go to Noun Phrases, we go to Grammatical Relation, and let's insert one right there, fronted oblique. It's good to include an example. And now it's available. So the input structure will look for this. Whenever the software finds a match, it will come down here and make just this one change, fronted oblique. And again, it's always good to insert a comment. Okay, so now when we click the Generate button, okay, God created heaven and earth, period, beginning in. But when we look here, we see the grammatical relation is set to fronted oblique. So our rule did what it was supposed to do. If we rest our cursor here, we find that the features were changed from oblique to fronted oblique by that rule we just worked on. And then if we look at the last two lines, inserted at end by phrase structure rule, clauses, generic, general purpose clause phrase structure rule. Whenever a phrase structure rule doesn't know where to put a constituent, it will insert it at the end. And it will tell you here in the pop-up, inserted at end. So let's go to our phrase structure rule for clauses. This is a pretty new language project. I haven't done much work in this grammar. There's only one phrase structure rule, and this is the template that we give you at the beginning of a project. We set this up for you. Well, TBTA sets it up for you. And it has all these groups. Clause initial punctuation, for example, opening quotation marks. Clause introducers, for example, noun phrase addressee. Clausal conjoiners, conjunction, adposition. If you have relativizers or complementizers, they would probably go in here. Preclausal modifiers, then the main clause. And in this template that we give you, it assumes SVO for an SVO language. If you're working in an SOV language, just move that up there. And now it's subject, object, verb. Let's put it back to SVO. So we want to put one new noun phrase into this rule for fronted obliques. Let's put it here. So I'll click there, then insert new constituent into rule. We want to insert a noun phrase. That's a fronted oblique. It's good to put a name, so we can click here. And you should put a comment, I won't, for the video. So there's our fronted oblique up here. We click OK. We click Initialize. Click Generate. Beginning in, God create heaven and earth. So we're getting there. We still need to adjust our phrase structure rule for noun phrases so that prepositions precede nouns. But that's the idea. So over here, you define up to 99 groups. Within each group, you define up to 99 rules. And then when the rules are executed, when TBTA is ready to execute this rule, it will get this rule, and it will start at the beginning of the verse, and we'll see this rule applies to nouns. So we'll start going through this verse, word by word, looking for a noun. As soon as it finds a noun, it will stop. And we'll look, does this input structure match what it finds in the verse? If it does, you will go to the output structure and make whatever changes you specify. Later, if you need to, you can change this, but if we change it to add positions, we would need to put an add position. Yet you need at least one add position in every input structure in the rule. We'll leave this at nouns.